Thank you. So I'm a little worried why Sandra made this such a big thing at the top of the talk, because I'm only meant to be doing this for 10 minutes, so it's going to be a little bit short, but hopefully you'll learn something from this today. So a little bit about me. Yeah, I work at TalkTalk now. I used to work at a user research agency called Bunnyfoot, and I was there for about 2.5 years before moving over to TalkTalk about 6-7 months ago. I'm not quite sure when. I've already forgotten. And before coming here and doing a lot more design work, I have a much stronger background in actually doing research and some accessibility as well. And then while at Bunnyfoot, I was switching over to design, and now that I've reached TalkTalk, that's pretty much my main job. So the whole purpose of this is just trying to work out basically why we decided to use Axure for our style guide, the kind of thought process behind it, and then also kind of what we actually went ahead and delivered. Unfortunately, there's very little I can show you, purely because we've done the thought. I've yet to actually build most of it. It's only been on my plate for about 6 months. I just haven't quite had enough time to finish it off. So the first thing is kind of just why Axure. So perhaps unsurprisingly, given this is an Axure meetup, we did use Axure, but there were a couple of different other thoughts that we went around kind of, should we, shouldn't we? And the first one was just kind of, just keep it really simple. Maybe this could just be a first iteration, but potential of PowerPoint, which sounds really daft, but it's just such an easy thing to do, at least for me. Coming from my background, it's just really easy to drop things in, stick in a couple of rules, and just go, this is what we should be doing. It's also really great for sharing outside of the team, particularly with the larger stakeholders, just giving them an idea of exactly what is possible, what isn't possible, what is our baseline, to kind of stop them from going a little bit crazy with some of their thoughts. But of course, doesn't show interactions. It's not really accessible unless you can actually open up the PowerPoint, even if you have a PDF. One of the things we want to do is be able to get access to this style guide everywhere. So that really wasn't a place to go. So of course, the next one is Axure. So some of the benefits here, you know, it is friendly on a mobile. We're building a responsive style guide, so I really hope the actual style guide is responsive. It's easily editable, at least if you have a good understanding in Axure and you've built the thing, so you should know how to play around and change it. And of course, the biggest one for us being a style guide is that it's easily reusable, since we do the majority of our prototyping in Axure. Very rarely will we go out, and if we go out of Axure, and if we do, that's usually just for wireframing rather than actual prototypes. But of course, one of the problems we had this with slow load times, which I'll explain a little bit more later, is a particularly big problem we have with the way we've currently got the style guide implemented, or at least theoretically implemented. And also a restricted show on the actual animations, which for research and sometimes also for dev can cause some confusions in terms of exactly what it is we're expecting from that animation. So there was the other option of actually just coding a fully responsive web one, which, you know, again, accessible on all devices. The animations generally work smoother and better, so for the interaction part, it's a much better tool to use. There's also the reusable code, so actually dev can go ahead, they can use it, working with them to create it. It gives them something that they have this kind of base and they can just pull stuff along. Problem being, it's harder to kind of change, at least depending on your level of codability and the higher setup cost. So if this was me doing it, which is what I'm meant to be doing, my code is sketchy at best. I can build a website eventually. I definitely can't do it quickly. So perhaps unsurprisingly, Axure was the very simple tool that we were going to use for this. So Axure kind of has something that's particularly good for building style guides, and that's the widgets, or more particularly the kind of custom widgets. So you can build your own widget library, and then you can drag and drop these things into your Axure prototype, and then you have everything there. So you build it once, and you can reuse it as many times as you want. Now this works really well if you're just building to kind of one view. The second you start bringing in the adaptive views, it doesn't really work. So actually, this is just me explaining what a widget is. But like I said, with and this is the Axure thing where it's you create a library for icons, designs, patterns, branded elements, and more. But the problem comes with the responsive bit, and that is if you can build it, you can actually build the widget as a responsive element. So you theoretically have this amazing thing where you can just drag and drop it into one view. It will copy perfectly across into all the other views, and you have this nice little widget to build things really quickly. The problem at the moment is actually the way Axure do responsive or adaptive, and they know this is the problem. And so at the moment what happens is you build this responsive widget, you drag it from your library onto your page, and it's fine. You can jump between the different adaptive views and it works perfectly. Problem is you then want to move that widget. You might just want to move it by a single pixel and it breaks. They lose the relationship between all the ones on the different adaptive layers, so you then have to start moving them all independently, and then they just slowly get worse and worse the more you start moving them around. Which actually means unless you have this amazing ability to design something and drop every single element into its place straight away, the very first time, this is not a good solution. Particularly for me, who is always playing and always moving things. Trying to make it pixel perfect, even though I know I really shouldn't be doing that. So it kind of actually went along with, we started this way, and then realized very quickly this was not a solution for us, building a responsive style guide. And as I said, this is something that Axure actually know about. If you go into the forum they have there, there's conversations about it. And the best recommendation they give at the moment is to use either masters or dynamic panels. And I generally try not to use dynamic panels whenever possible, so we generally go for masters. So that was our solution. For the moment, we're just going to build a style guide primarily using masters. So why this works, why this is good, is first off, it does actually work. You can build your master, and it'll have all the different adaptive views, and then you can import it into Axure prototype, and then there we go. You have your reusable widget, pull it across, drop it down, it's there, you can move it around as much as you want, and it's absolutely fine. Still works. Sometimes for individual elements, of course, you're going to need to break them away from the master. But that's just like a widget would be anyway. It's independent from the base. So of course, if you actually change the master, it won't change all the implementations you've already broken away. But that's exactly the same as a normal widget would be anyway. So it's not bad. I suppose it's not exactly great, but it still works. From a personal viewpoint, I generally build a lot of my stuff in masters. And I'm talking about masters as like everyone knows what they are. I'm assuming most people do. Anyone want an explanation on the master? Or? Yes, please. Okay. So the idea of a master is it's almost like a group. So you have a combination of different widgets, whether that be like a text element and then an input field, and you kind of create a module. And then you convert it into a master. And a master is basically a template. So you can drag it and you can move it onto multiple pages within the same project. And then if you decide something's actually wrong with that module, that grouping, you go back into the original document, the original master, you make the edit, and the edit gets changed everywhere through that entire prototype. So, like I said, I like to build that way anyway, purely because it might be slightly more efficient to build in groups instead of masters, but then if I do want to edit it, even if it's only a master of one, it means I can edit it on a different page. But for me, that's purely personal preference. And as we explained, masters and modules are generally quite good things to do anyway, particularly if you're going to be reusing them multiple places. So having them as a master is not a bad thing at all to do for responsive. But some of the problems we discovered, it creates quite heavy prototypes depending on how big your style guide is. So we've only, or at least I've only just started pulling my thing together, and I think I'm already up to about 46 masters, and I've been working on it today, a little bit of yesterday. And this is only one particular journey, so there's so many things I have yet to actually build, and that's going to create a really bloated and heavy prototype, which if you're just showing flats is fine. But it goes back to this idea I was saying earlier of sometimes Axure can be a little bit slow, which means some of the animations of the interactions then become either jarring or you just physically can't see what you were trying to achieve. So it's either opened or closed rather than, say, like a slow movement. And also, if you're actually doing research with it, and we at TalkTalk, we try and do research every 2 weeks, so we're always pushing something out there, getting something to see. If you're sitting around there and waiting, like 30 seconds for a page to load, Even though the person using it knows it is a prototype, they know it's not perfect, it still does affect the actual research. So it's not great if you're using masters exclusively. And this is just a picture to prove that within a day I've got 46 masters on this thing, and it's making the prototype already quite heavy. So knowing that masters are the right way to go for us and not widgets, how do we kind of come up with the best solution? So having a separate style guide, perhaps unsurprisingly, rather than having everything built into a masters, is not an amazing solution or a surprising solution. But of course, when you're thinking about using masters, you generally think about having the masters all inside the document you're using. But like I said, it creates something very heavy. So what we now have, or are planning to have, is a completely separate document that contains all of the masters that we'll use or ever need to use. And also on that, it gives us the ability to add all of the rules, show all of the interactions, explain the interactions in detail, which means anyone who comes in can see it, can use it. Dev can get an understanding of exactly what we're looking for. Anyone, really, can get an understanding of what we're using it for. But then when we're actually creating an Axure prototype for a specific thing, we can go ahead and use the ability within Axure to import specific masters. So we kind of already have an idea of the elements that we'll need to bring in to that prototype we're going to build. So we can just import the ones that we're interested in, which will seriously reduce the number of masters that that project then has to hold, which then makes it a lot quicker, a lot lighter, and a lot better for doing research on. And of course, with Axure, if you suddenly realize you need a master you haven't imported, you can just import it later on. So that still works really well from that viewpoint. So this is kind of just an example page of where I am at the moment. It's still a work in progress, but the idea is you just have these kind of different elements. You explain the rules, you can give all the information you need, and they work across all the different breakpoints, so they can show the different examples of how it looks across different pages. Lots of different adaptive views within Axure. And just to give a slightly better example, so here is it's just part of a particular page, and we have a lot going on here, but it's essentially built up of multiple different master elements. So on this page, what we have, I'm just going to need my mouse, is, so we have kind of the little tick box. Okay, in this case, we use a much larger tick box. That's just our preference. And so that's a certain master because it behaves in a certain way. Then we also have the drop down here. Very simple drop down. It does exactly what you think it would do when you click on it. But again, that's another separate master. And then we have this entire, I've lost my mouse, element here is another master. And that master is actually part of a repeater. So we can then do iterations of exactly the same thing using repeater information, and then that creates an entire list. And all I've done is drag this master onto a page, and then up here you can't quite see it, but it's a drop down, and that drop down is how we handle the process of getting access to all the information on mobile. And then when we go up to tablet and later desktop, we use a slightly different version, but it's exactly the same master that shows two different things because it works in a different adaptive views. So it's very quickly for us to quickly stack multiple masters on top of each other to actually go ahead and create an element, which then creates the overall module, which then creates the page. So it allows us to very quickly build our prototypes, or hopefully, when I eventually finish it, build our prototypes really quickly without having to code everything, or at least build things in Axure every single time, again and again, which is what we've been doing a lot of recently. And that's just the desktop version from the previous two, which was tablet and mobile. So that's pretty much my talk. It's quite high level. There's not much detail. Unfortunately, like I said, it hasn't actually been built yet. It's a lot of theory. So any questions? Two over there?
Can you just elaborate a bit more on what you meant by the repeater?
Okay. So a repeater is I think you find it in the widget area within the normal Axure prototype. But the idea is you create a visual element. So in our case, it is this. And it's all built up of masters. And you create one version of it. And then you actually have the ability to, it looks a little bit like an Excel document. And you can just type in different information. So we'll have one row, and we'll call that row title. and then in that row we'll give it like 5 different titles because we want 5 different rows. And what happens is when you load that repeater, it takes the information and basically puts it into the right place. So if I have 5 titles, it says Sky Movies Boost, Entertainment Extra Boost, Kids Boost, and I've just got that in a single field in a single row, and it just pulls that information in and just builds it straight away. And that's also, again, it's very useful purely because I can then build one module, and if I visually change it, they all change straight away. Was there a question there as well?
I'm quite new to Axure, so this might be a stupid question, but when you say it's responsive, are you building the 3 different views, or just Axure?
No, it's more adaptive, which is why I keep flip-flopping between the two. It's technically adaptive. We just think about it internally as responsive because it's easier to talk to our stakeholders in that way. But no, it's not fluid or anything like that. Anything else? Okay.
More or less linked to the second question.
Yeah.
You say you were using one master across desktop and tablet.
Yeah.
And it's more or less responsive?
Yeah, so it goes between adaptive views. So when I built it in, so we use 3 different views. We've got mobile, tablet, and desktop. I dragged all of the elements into mobile, created the master, moved over to tablet, moved them where I needed them to be, repeated the same thing in desktop, and now every time I drag that master in, it just drags it in as a whole unit that has the different views on the different adaptive areas.
Yeah, I've got a really stupid question here, which is, this style guide, that's really just for the UX department, is that correct?
So its primary focus was for that, but the idea with building all the rules in, bringing all the information in, is to actually share that with the wider team. So that will be with the visual guys and the dev guys, just so they get an understanding of what we're looking for. But the actual drag and droppable bit is ours. We're the only one who use it.
So you're actually publishing the style guide for the whole company as an Axure prototype?
Yeah, there'll just be a
link.
link.
Are you doing that on Axure?
Yeah.
Or are you hosting it internally?
It will be on Axure, but you won't be able to get to it because you can password lock them.
Okay. But the people that get the link.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happens if someone makes a mistake and
shares it?
Deletes it.
Oh, delete. Oh, they won't be able to delete it.
That URL back again, so you'll have to send it out to them.
So they won't be able. They'll just have a destination link, and they'll go in and they can just see it.
It's actually very easy to.
They get fired.
Yeah. Yeah. No. You could delete it. Yeah.
The problem I actually have right now.
Okay.
With creating internal resources.
Yeah.
In Axure, which I think is a brilliant thing to do, but I'm trying to get them to host it on a proper server.
Yeah.
So that I can get the internal URL rather than relying on an external resource to host it with a very precarious URL.
Yeah, no, well, I was going to say, I think you are probably right. At the moment, we are fairly small within our UX team and kind of who has access to that. And there are like local copies as well. But in the longer term, I think that's something we'll have to sit down and explore as well. And we don't have a solution yet. I don't know if Sandra has something more.
So if I may add, so one of the things we try to do, one of the things we try to do, not that it works all the time, is the minute. So right now we are sharing a template. It's not just the style guide. It's kind of like our documentation on how we do template. So the minute you download it, you have to upload it immediately as a new file. So it kind of breaks that link. So that's one of the things we do, and it's kind of like required. When you download it, you upload it immediately and request a new unique URL, and that will break kind of that. Well, it will save us from having that problem happen, which has happened before. So it's a real problem. Now, if I may add, I've done this before. One of the challenges of dragging and dropping from one side to the other is if you do have a global variable and it depends, so one of your masters depends on that global variable, what you need to do is not everything is lost. What you need to do is create the global variable with the exact same name in your new file first, and then drag the new element, and it would honor the fact that you are referring to that global variable. So that's actually really cool. And if it wouldn't work, it would be a big problem if you are relying on global variables. So I just wanted to add that.
That has kind of reminded me, because question in a second. Following on from that, actually, by reusing the same master and dragging it in. So I was having this thing where I was having an element, basically the drop down. And because I dragged multiple ones into the same page, I'd click on it. And because the drop-down interaction all had exactly, because I was using the toggle feature that Sandra's showing us here, they all had exactly the same name. So what was happening was it was happening to everything because it was calling every single thing with the same name. So the other thing that we're going to have to remember to do, and this is on us, but I'll add some information about doing it, is actually that we're going to have to go in and every time we drag in an element is rename it, which is what we should be doing anyway if you're doing it right. But it could be something that could slip with the drag and drop nature. Anyway, sorry, there was a question?
So is this going to be a sort of a kind of controlled, canonical set of things? I'm just wondering how you're going to kind of handle trials of new masters or changes to masters that then don't have this kind of ripple effect across all the different prototypes you've created from it.
Yeah, so I think at the moment we are going to try and just do the idea of every time we change a master, keep the old one, particularly if we're bouncing between the two, until basically the hope is that whatever we have in master form is what we have live. Now, keeping that up to date with what's live, because sometimes stuff goes live that doesn't necessarily go through our team, so it's not perfect, but it gives us a good consistent base, at least for when we're doing the research, so we know that the change we're making isn't caused by another change that we've made by keeping up with the live. But again, it comes down to, I think we're just going to have to learn these practices as we go. This is a new thing to us fairly, and so, you know, in a year, I'd hopefully have a much better answer for you. Okay.
Is this on top, this Axure, is it on top of some development widget components that they have as well in some kind of style guide repository?
Yeah, so Visual have their own version of a similar version of this, similar type of thing. The actual dev guys have a similar version, and because we're quite lucky at the moment in creating this that we're only just going responsive, so we're actually working as the three teams to make sure that we are consistent in all our elements. Otherwise, it's pointless. So there is a collaboration effort going on at the moment to make sure all of our effectively baselines are the same and similar. Well, the same, not even similar. So again, they are different, but it's because they serve slightly different purposes with slightly different requirements from each one.
Any other questions?
Brilliant. Well, thank you.